Welcome, everyone, to episode 48 of Ohio Unsolved. I'm your host, Matthew, and today's episode is about the abduction and imprisonment of Josef Fritzl. Now, I've noticed a growth of new listeners over the last few weeks, and I just want to say welcome, and I hope that you all continue to listen and enjoy the podcast. Make sure all you new listeners join us on the Ohio Unsolved Facebook group. That's where all the action and news outside of the episodes happen. Well, alright everyone, let's just get right into the episode. Everybody sit back, make sure to lock your doors and windows, and get ready for Ohio Unsolved. Our first story is very disturbing, so listener discretion is advised. Born on April 9th, 1935, in Amstetten, Austria, Josef Fritzl would marry 17-year-old Rosemarie in 1956. Together, they would have 7 children, including 5 daughters. One of the girls, Elizabeth, was born in 1966. 1 year later, Joseph was convicted of rape and he served 18 months in prison. For Elizabeth, her home life was troubled, and at the age of 17, she ran away from home and hid in Vienna with a friend. She was then found 3 weeks later and forced to return home. According to Elizabeth, her father started to sexually abuse her in 1977, when she was only 11. 1 year later, her horrible ordeal would begin. For Elizabeth, it all started innocently enough with helping her father move a door downstairs. On August 29, 1984, when she was 18 years old, she would help to carry the door downstairs and put it into place on the door frame. It was not until the door was in place that she realized that the door was for her, and that she was now calling the basement home. After knocking her out with ether, her father threw her into the chamber. She would remain there for over 20 years. Her mother knew nothing of this and filed a missing person report with the police when her daughter disappeared. 1 month later, Joseph gave a police letter and said that it was mailed to them by Elizabeth. In reality, he had forced her to write it while in captivity, postmarked it from a different community so that the letter told that she was living with a friend and that she did not want to be found. From this moment on, her life of terror and abuse would continue. Every 3 days, her father would visit her in her chamber, bringing her food and supplies. He later admitted that during the visits that he would sexually assault her. Those attacks would result in the birth of 7 children in captivity. 3 children would be removed from captivity and began living with Joseph and his wife. Somehow, he was able to convince not only his wife, but social services that the children appeared on his doorstep. He and his wife would be approved as foster parents as a result. Social services would visit the home on a regular basis to check on the children, but there was nothing reported to raise any doubts or suspicions in them. The prison, and that's what it was, would be enlarged 10 years after Elizabeth was kidnapped by her father, and items such as a VCR, a TV, a refrigerator, and a hot plate would be added. Despite the amenities, there was no mistaking that Elizabeth and her children were living in hell. Her father would often turn the lights out for days just to punish them. He also told Elizabeth and the 3 children with her that if they tried to escape, he had the ability to gas them and kill them all. Now this was an empty threat, as it was found there were no capabilities to do this at all. Joseph also told Elizabeth that if she ever touched the door, she would receive an electric shock that would kill her instantly. It can make you wonder how his wife never figured out that her own daughter was being assaulted by her husband in the basement where 3 other children lived, but she claimed that she never knew. Joseph's sister-in-law stated that she would see him go into the basement at 9 a.m. every day to draw up plans for some devices to sell to firms. Another tenant who lived there for 12 years said that they heard noises in the basement, but Joseph told them that the noises were just the heating system. Elizabeth's ordeal would finally come to an end in 2008. It was on April 19th that her oldest daughter, Kirsten, fell ill and she had to get medical attention. Kirsten would leave the basement for the first time in her life, seeing the outside world. It was Elizabeth's first time seeing the outside in 24 years, but she was then returned to the dungeon and remained there for another week. When Kirsten began to develop kidney failure, Joseph said that he had a note from her mother that discussed the condition, and this raised the eyebrows of medical staff, who then began to question the story and put out an appeal for finding the missing mother. It was at this moment that police reopened the missing person case associated with Elizabeth. Joseph stated that Elizabeth had left to join a cult, but a church official who had knowledge of cults had doubts about the story. The letters seemed to have been dictated and were written in an odd manner. Elizabeth begged her father to let her go to the hospital to see her daughter, which he allowed. Upon arrival, the police were tipped off, and Joseph and Elizabeth were taken to the police station for questioning. Elizabeth refused to talk until the police told her that she would never have to see her father again. Once she was assured of this, she spoke for 2 straight hours about her captivity. Many of the details would cause revulsion around the world, including the forcing of her father to make her watch pornographic movies and the repeated times that he sexually abused her. According to Elizabeth, her father would make her recreate the scenes from the films in front of her children with him. On April 27, 2008, Elizabeth, her children, and her mother were taken into care. 2 days later, DNA evidence confirmed that the 7 children were Joseph's. Joseph was arrested and charged with extensive series of crimes. On March 16, 2009, Josef Fritzl would go on trial. He would plead guilty on all accounts except grievous assault and murder. During the trial, jurors watched an 11-hour testimony from Elizabeth that was so horrendous that many could only watch for 2 hours at a time. 4 replacement jurors had to be brought in because several of the jurors could not stand to hear any more evidence. On March 18th, following the testimony from his daughter, Joseph changed his plea to guilty on all counts. On March 19th, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. The incident would send shockwaves around Austria, and the chancellor of the country would have to launch a massive image campaign to try and restore the reputation of the country in the eyes of the world. The kind of person to do this to their own daughter is just beyond sick. I first heard this story from the Time Suck podcast, and he doesn't spare any details. This first segment is around 9 minutes, 10 minutes long, and his episode on Josef Fritzl is around 2 hours long. I left out a lot of details. I couldn't believe my ears by some of the details. Now, I couldn't understand someone doing this to a stranger, let alone their own daughter. I just hope that Elizabeth and her kids are able to lead a somewhat normal life now that they are free. Our next story comes from YourGhostStories.com. I'm a 50-year-old, sober, drug-free grandmother. My sanity has never been questioned, not to my face anyway. My folks settled in the foothills of the Cumberland Mountains in Tennessee, and we might have what might be described as a very country way of speaking. One winter night, when I was about 7 years old, I was at my aunt's house. The adults were in the living room, sitting around the fireplace talking. We kids, my brother, our cousins, and I, were scampering all over the house, playing hide and seek, raising the occasional ruckus, and generally having fun. I was hiding in an old wardrobe when I noticed that the grown-ups had lowered their voices. I jumped out of the wardrobe and, for optimum listening purposes, scuttled behind a bedroom door. They were telling ghost stories. One particularly chilling story involved an abandoned house. It was said that in this house, at a certain time of year, one could hear a baby crying just before midnight. Then, on the stroke of the hour itself, a coffin containing a baby would appear in the parlor. I marched into the living room and I said, "Is this true? About the baby in the casket?" The grown-ups sat there a moment, looking at each other. Then my aunt reached for my hand and pulled me over to stand beside her chair. "Honey, we're just sitting around telling a bunch of old stories, just passing time is all. Now, some parts you heard might be true." Before I had time to wonder which parts, she was talking about my other aunt, looking me straight in the eye, and she declared, "But there ain't no such thing as a haunt." I took her words to heart. They echoed authoritatively throughout the several decades of my life. Many of my childhood friends believed in ghosts. They wouldn't go near a cemetery unless they had to, fearing a haunt would get them if they did. Smugly secure in my belief that there ain't no such thing as a haunt, I took shortcuts through graveyards whenever it was convenient, day or night. Later on, my daughter wanted a Ouija board. I got her one. There ain't no such thing as a haunt, so why shouldn't she have one of those Ouija toys to play with? For some 40-odd years, I lived a happy, haunt-free life, but not anymore. I recently worked for a gentleman who sold repossessed mobile homes. On the lot one morning, Bill, a co-worker, called me on the radio and summoned me to 087, a newly arrived double-wide. I climbed up inside it. "Bill, you in here?" "In the master bath," came Bill's reply. He was standing in front of the tub with a sour look on his face. I walked in, then backed right out. The bathroom stank to high heaven. There were mounds of dead flies on the windowsill and on the floor behind the toilet. "Where's it coming from?" I asked. Bill shook his head. "I don't know, but we'll have to find out. Ain't nobody gonna buy a trailer with a bathroom that stinks like this." Over the next several days, Bill and I, along with 3 others, worked on 087. We searched high and low for the source of that stench. We removed wall panels and examined the hidden interior room that housed the furnace and water heater. We poked around between the vapor barrier and flooring. We flushed the drain traps, and at one point, in fits of desperation, we even peeled back the bathroom carpet and padding. We found no evidence of any leaks, no dead vermin, nothing. In the course of these events, we noticed some odd things about the odor. For one thing, it was sporadic. Whenever it showed up, piles of dead flies showed up with it. The smell would dissipate, but the flies stayed behind. We had to suck them up with the hand vac. Also, the odor was strong, almost overpowering, inside the bathroom. One step outside the bathroom door, though, the smell was undetectable. Now, I've watched the same movies everyone else has watched, and I know that confronted with the same circumstance, a lot of people would have been immediately clued in that some sort of spook was fiddle farting around. Not I, though. Ain't no such thing as a haunt. As a matter of fact, one of the guys did say something about 087 being possessed instead of repossessed, but he was joking. As far as I know, that's the only allusion to the supernatural that any of us made. We opened windows, we sprayed disinfectant, and set out air fresheners. We burned scented candles and incense. If it smelled good, we tried it. Finally, 3 days passed with no odor presenting itself, and we thought that we cured it. Maybe we did. On a hot, very busy day in September, I climbed up inside 087 to get started on one final job that had to be done before the home would be ready to sell. A sheet of drywall in the dining area needed to be replaced. I was measuring the wall when the toilet in the master bathroom flushed. I nearly lost my religion right then and there. Here I was, in a sweltering, airless trailer, sweat pouring off of me, and some idiot, probably a prospective buyer, had just used a toilet that wasn't hooked to a sewage system. It was not unusual for these used mobile homes to arrive on the lot with enough water for a flush retained in their lavatory tanks. And despite taped down lids and do not use signs, people sometimes did avail themselves in the facilities. I dropped my tape measure and went stomping off towards the bathroom. On the way down the warpath, it didn't dawn on me that until I had entered it, this trailer had been locked. The bathroom door was standing wide open. The pig hadn't even bothered to close it. He was standing right there in front of the throne, hitching up his pants, with his right side facing me. He was tall, had a beer gut, and a mop of tangled red hair. He had on jeans and a gray muscle shirt that looked as though it had seldom seen the inside of a washing machine. His pudgy arms were covered with jailhouse tattoos. One was a pair of dice rolled to snake eyes. I remember wondering why he hadn't opted for boxcars. Attached to his belt, there was a leather sheath with what appeared to be a 6-inch boot knife in it. Sir? He went from pig to sir in the span of a heartbeat. A sight like that will just naturally take the wind out of your sails. Judging from the look on his face, he was surprised to see me, which was puzzling, because he had to have heard my approach. As we stared at each other, his expression changed, becoming sullen. I perceived a threat. He lowered his head slightly, still watching me. His right hand reached for that blade. Then he clicked off. He just wasn't there anymore. It made me dizzy. Either I had just witnessed a ghost, or I had a horribly defective mind. You didn't even wash your hands. I said that out loud, hastily departed. And I took a break outside, wondering how I was going to get that Ouija board away from my daughter. I decided to do what all parents do whenever a child acquires something she's better off without. I'd buy something bigger, better, and more expensive and attempt to negotiate a trade. I thought about my childhood jaunts through the local cemeteries. No telling what kind of boogers had been lurking in the shadows back then, just waiting to pounce on my unsuspecting self. I saw the apparition only once, and I never smelled the foul odor again. The last time I was inside 087, the whole trailer smelled like a smoked coconut, thanks to our dedicated freshening efforts. Shortly after all this happened, my employer had a heart attack. Not haunt-related, as far as I know. Resulting health issues forced him to sell his inventory, including 087, to other dealers around the region. It's an attractive mobile home, so it's reasonable to assume someone has bought it by now. It's a 96 model 28 by 48 with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. It has beige siding, all the front windows, including a large and very lovely bay window, are trimmed with red shutters. There is a rectangular skylight in the kitchen. The ceiling in the dining area has a framed mirror with a swag light dangling from it. An identical mirror, sans light, is mounted to the wall behind the pastel yellow garden tub in the master bath. If this sounds like your home, you might want to arm yourself before going to the bathroom, or at least knock before you go in, because there is such a thing as a haunt, and you just might be living with one. Our final story also comes from YourGhostStories.com. My name is Meredith. I have lived in my current home for 7 years, a small college apartment complex right across the street from the college. It's relatively new, with only a few proven ghosts, one being a suicide victim named Justin, who killed himself in a dumpster 20 feet from my house. That happened only a year ago, so he isn't the reason for my problem. Over the course of the years, up until the present, almost every night, I hear these odd whispering sounds. All of them are normal human voices, whether male or female, with no noticeable accent, and they all say completely random things. This happened right as I'm falling asleep, and most sound too far away for me to hear exactly what they are saying. But after 5 minutes, one of them speaks directly into my ear, saying something random. For example, last night, one adult male voice said exactly as I write, "Shaking." Once I hear a voice in my ear, they all cease and start again 5 to 10 minutes later when I'm ready to fall asleep. Usually, this happens 3 or 4 times over the course of an hour, until I actually do fall asleep. I've never heard these voices during the day. They only speak when I'm about to fall asleep. I've told this to my mother after she had something similar to this happen. Whenever she tries to fall asleep, right as she does, she hears a loud explosion and sees a bright flash of light. 3 doctors have proven that this is not the result of a seizure, but some odd harmless disorder. I have not had this experience, and my mother has never heard the voices. What the hell is going on? Is it actually ghosts? Many people have died in my apartment complex, but I do not know them personally. Being an atheist, I do not wish to try prayer, even if that might work against the ghosts. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope that you all enjoyed the stories. Please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. A 5-star rating really helps others to find us. Don't forget to join us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube. If you do enjoy the podcast, please consider helping to support the show by subscribing on Patreon, with monthly bonus episodes beginning at the $5 tier. Once again, thank you everyone for listening, and make sure to keep your doors and windows locked, and stay ready for Ohio Unsolved.